Hello, everybody, and welcome to almost, I would say, the first of its kind, which is a review and, I don't know, I don't want to say praise or, I guess review is the fairest thing, of a role-playing game that has caught our attention. And when this happens from time to time, it means that we have to talk about it, because we ultimately, I don't know that you can be a true tabletop gamer, and this is dangerous talk, I apologize, without being into role-playing games of some kind at some point in history. You know what I mean? It's like, I can be a card gamer, and I can be like, miniatures gamer, but to be a tabletop gamer, I must embrace at least some form of role-playing. So we're here to do that. We're hoping to pick up our role-playing coverage as well, and joining me with that is Rick Harrelson. Hello, Rick.
Hello.
And he is our, I would say, resident role-playing expert. And in fact, Rick, I want you to tell me about a little bit of your role-playing history. I'm going to blindside you with that question,
okay,
so that everyone knows why they should listen to you.
So I've been playing since I was little. My brother, who's about 10 years older than me, quite a bit older than me, he loved Dungeons & Dragons, original Dungeons & Dragons and all of that business. So I grew up playing original D&D, and then
of course, beautiful,
second edition, third edition, and all of those crazy things. And that was really where I spent a lot of my time as a child. A lot of the sort of the classic games. I also played Rifts and Palladium, like a lot of the older, classic, I would consider them classic, I guess, role-playing games. And then at some point, I made friends with some people who were playing what they called indie role-playing games.
Ooh. It's like the dark side of the role-playing community, right?
Yeah.
Or is it the light side?
The craziest thing I had never played was like Champions, which is still it's a very chunky, it's a very heavy system with lots of rules. And then they were like, hey, here's this game, Amber, and there are no dice. And I was like, that doesn't, how can you play a role-playing game with no dice? That doesn't make any sense at all. So anyway, I got into indie games from there, and oh man, just opened my mind, and now I play everything that I can get my hands on.
Now you've got, and you literally do have hundreds of role-playing games at your disposal.
I have a few.
I know, because I've seen them. So we're here with a book called Torchbearer. Here's the book. This is what it looks like. It's wonderful. It is a book by Tor Olivsrud, and I apologize, Tor, if I messed your name up. I know I've talked to you before, and I think you've corrected me on it before. But Tor Olivsrud and Luke Crane, and you might know Luke from Burning Wheel, which is one of our role-playing games that we are still into and covered a while back. You can find a review of that a long time ago. And so we've kept up with Luke, and this thing kind of dropped. It started on Kickstarter, which had me super excited, and it was marketed as an homage to classic Dungeons & Dragons. But knowing Luke and Tor, it was going to be a different experience, from that classic thing. And then we got Torchbearer. So it kickstarted successfully, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement. Book came out. Here it is. We've been playing it. We played it more than a few times, probably 4 or 5 times now, enough to kind of get a decent opinion on how it works. And so we're here to talk to you about it. So the first thing I want to say is the quality of the material itself.
Absolutely.
And I really do like starting with this for general reasons, but also because I know a lot of thought and care went into the actual production of this book. I know that's a big thing for Luke, just by the way that he's talked and kind of the things that he does make me think that the quality of the book itself are very important to him. So we have this beautiful, if you're talking about homage to classic Dungeons & Dragons, it does not get any better than that. This cover is beautiful. The back, it just takes you right there. It takes you right into it. Even says 3 gold and 5 silver pieces for the price of the book, which, if that tells you anything, which it should, that's all you need to know. It's got this really good classic art style.
Yeah, the art is very reminiscent of those older games. I love the black and white. Like, I don't know. It's all the things that you remember and that you want. Even the font.
The font, the way that everything works
is taking you to those places. Yeah,
it's really good. So it kind of, from the very beginning, it takes you right into the feel of Torchbearer, which is that kind of old school dungeon diving feel. The paper, dude. I know it's kind of weird to talk about the paper, but like it's a serious thing. Like this is really good paper. I know it was actually a point to make it that way. So for the book itself, as far as the presentation of the system, I would say that it's really fantastic. It does a really good job of getting across exactly what it's trying to get across in that way. And it's a quality book, and you feel like, this is a quality piece of thing. So
yeah, I think they did a good job design-wise. It's one of those books where, like, you can actually kind of judge it by its cover, right?
Yeah.
So you look at it and you're like, okay, the style of the art, like the hardback book itself, like the nature of it's just very like, this is the kind of game that it's going to be, and then it delivers on that particular. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about
Indeed.
the game, shall we? So kick it off. Tell me what you think ultimately about what the game is about, and whether or not it kind of, what kind of person is going to enjoy this kind of game. Let's talk about the game of Torchbearer itself.
So yeah, with role-playing games, the thing that I usually think of as most important when I'm thinking about genre and feel, and it's like it wants to tell a story, a certain type of story.
Yep.
And the first question is like, what type of story does this want to tell? And you mentioned a little bit earlier when you said it was an homage to those older games like D&D, or more recently, I guess, Pathfinder, the sort of fantasy realm. And Torchbearer wants to tell that story, but it wants to do it in a little grittier.
Yeah, very much so.
Setting. Yeah. So it's not quite, incredible heroes with shining armor, but dudes with dirt on them, digging in tombs, trying to get rich. That sort of that sort of feel.
It feels way more. It's way more realistic in a sense. It doesn't have that kind of. Your mages and wizards and stuff don't have these like crazy fire slinging nutso spells so much as, hey, I can make light appear, and that's like really significant, And like and I even thought about this when I was watching Lord of the Rings recently. Is like one of the most common uses of like Gandalf's wizardry is just like making light in his staff, and like everyone's like, whoa, magic, it's crazy, and it feels more like that. It's grittier, and I would almost say that it's not like a horror survival type thing for that kind of thing, but survival feels to me like a basic. Like an important concept of the game.
Yeah, not horror, but the survival. Part itself,
it's like you're not like the surviving is like one of the main goals of the game. It's not going down and getting the treasure. That's almost secondary to getting back.
It is.
Out.
Living, staying alive, is the goal. Yeah.
Living and getting enough money to like maybe get a little better. It feels to me like what Torchbearer is all about.
And that's sort of the first big detour from, and we talked about how it's an homage and like those other games, but that's the sort of the first big detour that they want to take, right? Is the fact that living is now a problem, where it's not always necessarily the first worry in those older games. Like staying alive is probably issue number one here.
Issue numero uno for Torchbearer. And I heard it described, I don't know, I think it was Luke that said this, but that the role of the GM in Torchbearer is to take essentially like worthless peasants who have nothing else going for them, who are literally just destitute, and turning those people into heroes. And that is ultimately like what the campaign of Torchbearer is about, is taking just a really insignificant, destitute thing, and through this like weird act of like the last resort, which is going into weird dungeons and sewers and trying to scrape up a bracelet or something, telling a story about heroes ultimately in the end. And I think we can all agree that those stories that have those kinds of characters that turn into these heroic figures are oftentimes way better than stories that have heroes doing heroic things over and over and over again. So,
and when you talk about, you mentioned turning into heroes and heroic actions. With Torchbearer, and this is probably like the second thing that it wants to do that's different than those other classic games, and that's that when it talks about heroes and doing heroic actions, it's not necessarily like slaying the big monster or it could be like making the choice to help a fellow companion, or not to kill the monster. Like it wants to delve into social issues in a way that just doesn't exist in the other games. It's not that you can't do
not
it
mechanically.
And not mechanically. It doesn't mechanically exist in the other games, and does in Torchbearer. And so we can get into that as well. I think that's probably the second thing it wants to do.
So we have basically, this is a game about survival. It's a game about taking insignificant people and turning them into maybe, like you said, heroes in the sense that they grow and kind of become larger than when they started. I'll say that. And it's also a game about like social conflict in a way. It's about making choices, and when survival's on the line, making choices is a much more interesting thing.
Making difficult choices.
Difficult choices, yeah. So that seems cool, and it's set in kind of this dungeon delving. Now, I will say, as far as what type of game it is, it seems like a very specific kind of game.
Yes.
Like, it's telling a very specific kind
story. Of story. Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't take Torchbearer and apply it to like sci-fi, GURPS style. I wouldn't.
It's not a system. It's not an open system.
No.
I think. I mean, it isn't that you couldn't do those things. Mm-hmm. It just isn't made for it, and so you probably want to do games that are made for those systems. This wants to tell a story about exactly what we said, like the poorest of the poor making tough choices. And really seeing what happens. I mean, maybe they don't. You said bigger. Maybe it's not heroes. Maybe they make. Yeah. Maybe they make the other decision. But like, that's the story he wants to tell. Like, people dealing with really hard situations and tough choices, and like, what choices did they make, and what story does that tell?
All right. So if that sounds appealing to you, then keep watching and keep listening. I guess you want to move on to the mechanics themselves, and like how it accomplishes this feel of the things we've been talking about. And the first one I think that I want to mention is, let's start with character creation. Mm-hmm. Character creation in the game is way more. It almost feels like Golden Axe to me. It's certainly more in depth than Golden Axe, but like, you have a very limited set of choices. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're an elf, you're a ranger. Period. Yeah. There's no going back from that. If you're a dwarf, you're an adventurer. It's the only reason a dwarf is in this game is to adventure. Why else are they coming up to the surface? Yeah. Like, there's no reason. Well, now, whereas humans have a choice, right? I think humans can be magicians, clerics, or like thieves, fighters, like rogues or fighters.
It can't be rogues,
And then halflings have to be rogues.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it fits you immediately into a role. And when I first saw this, I was discouraged. I was a little discouraged because it was like, man, I'm the kind of guy who likes to take a character and make them weird. Have the elf priest or something. Like, have some kind of weird combination of things. It isn't ideal, but it kind of works and is interesting. But what I found was that you could actually do a lot of that in the rest of the character creation, which is you make really interesting decisions during character creation. Where was I born? And what does that like do? Like, where do I have a mentor? And did they teach me anything? Like,
the mechanics allow those choices to be meaningful. And like in other games, like, you can certainly have a mentor, you can certainly be from the city, but like, it doesn't have necessarily impacts on gameplay or social structure. But here, each of those choices is given weight.
Yes.
So if you choose to be from the city, it means certain things. Like, it means you get a bonus and or a negative, and you don't get to do the other things. Like, you must have city traits. You cannot have.
Yeah. And I started to dig that because I'm sure you're the same way. Like, we would always have the old school adventures where everyone brings a story to the table. It was like, it became a requirement after after role playing for a few years. It's like, we want everyone to create a character and then write a backstory for that character. Sure, and in Torchbearer, writing the backstory and creating the character are the same thing. You do it all at one time. So you ask questions like, I've got it here, where's your home? What are your social graces? What's your specialty? How are you wise? And wises are a very interesting thing about this game.
Yeah, we'll talk about those in a minute.
Nature, which is very interesting, kind of playing to the nature of the race that you choose. And then you have circles and relationships. And it's not that you min-max points. It's you ask yourself questions. Do you have friends who enjoy your occasional visits, or are you a loner, tough and cool? And that has an impact. So you choose one of those. Then you keep going and you keep asking yourself these questions about your character. And that's basically how you create a character. So starting from the get-go, it's a different experience from what somebody might be used to. You're not worried about making the most...
From both directions, actually, right? If you're coming from a classic D&D, setting, it's different than that. It's also different if you're coming at it from the other side of, like, indie role-playing games and more free-form.
Where you can just make...
Yeah, because it isn't that. It's neither, right? It's sort of this in-between... Yeah.
It's right in the middle. And so you're not trying to min-max points. You're not trying to like make the most efficient character, the most effective character. You're just trying to make an interesting character that has a backstory and comes from somewhere and has somewhere to go, like that kind of a thing.
Yeah. And so we should say again that it is, like we said earlier, it does funnel you to a specific type of character, right? So if you choose the halfling, you must be the rogue, and that means you must be from this area, and and so the choices you make are funneled in a particular direction. There are still obviously differences.
Yeah, there's some
you can
wiggle
separate
room.
your character, and I think that when I first saw it, I actually thought of it. It seemed like a negative. I was like, I feel like it's funneling me towards this very narrow scope, and like you were saying, like I like to do different things. I like to be, but then after a playthrough or two, I realized that it was doing it like with very good reasons in mind. Like so if you're going and you're like, man, I feel like I'm being restricted here. The goal isn't restriction. I think the goal is guiding you and helping you tell the kind of story that the game wants to tell.
I think that's fair.
So it's not a negative, but it's just a different type of thing. You have to just be open to it, and just let it happen.
It.
Yeah, let it wash over you.
I'll tell you what.
Accept it.
That's maybe the number one thing I can say about Torchbearer in general. Is just let it happen. Don't bring any like preconceived ideas about the way something should work or the way that something should be. Just follow Torchbearer, follow the rules, and
have the experience that it's trying to let you have, and then judge after that. It'd be like, okay, well, I love that experience, or maybe, you'll find out. Yeah.
All right. So mechanics-wise, we have character creation, which is somewhat restraining, but it's almost one of those things where creativity is bred out of restraint. It allows you to, the one skill that you take differently actually defines your character way more than it would in another game where you have 30 skills and everyone's kind of the same. So it's like, I'm a rogue halfling, but I took a level of fighter because I stayed in this, I was born in this place, I was in this city, or I chose like, sword wise for my wise, and now all of a sudden like I know about swords, and that's kind of cool. So there is some decent stuff there and some interesting stuff there. And then about the game itself. So tell me, like I played a bit of Torchbearer before you got involved, and I was into it long before. I read the whole book a few times, and what is the number one mechanic that strikes you about Torchbearer? As kind of, if you had to say that there's one defining thing about Torchbearer, what would you say that it ultimately is? Is it the torches? Is it the light and the game turns and the ticking of
I think
of
it has
conditions?
to be. I don't think that's my favorite mechanic in the game. But it has we talked a little bit about Luke and Burning Wheel. So a lot of the things that he, from Burning Wheel are also in Torchbearer. And I think probably a couple of those are my favorite actual mechanics.
Nice, yeah.
But for new mechanics, it's definitely the light source.
Yeah.
Again, which was another thing that I thought, before we played, I was like, I don't know about this, having to keep track of, my backpack slots and how much light and
it's
candles
not quite
I can
Amber,
bring.
is it?
I was like, really, I have to keep track of this stuff. But they are, and what we talked about earlier, they facilitate making hard choices and telling the story that you want to that the game wants to tell. So it's another one of those things. You just kind of have to let it wash over you. That's my favorite. The light is probably my favorite
and
new mechanic.
The basic rundown of the light mechanic for you guys is essentially you have torches, lanterns, candles, those kinds of things. And whenever you're adventuring, the adventure phase is what it's called in the book. Every time there's a roll made, there's any kind of a conflict where you have to resolve it. You essentially take what's called a game turn. So a turn ticks by. And every fourth turn that ticks by, you take a condition. And so conditions, rather than having hit points or anything like that, I think a lot of the more, I would say, indie games have gotten away from this concept almost completely. This hit point thing. It's like I have a certain amount of number of things and I lose them until I die, and that's the story. But in Torchbearer you have conditions: angry, thirsty, hungry and thirsty, tired or exhausted, sick, injured. So you have markers to tell you how your character is feeling that has nothing to do with like a number or scale, but it's all to do with the reality of what your character is facing. It's like, I just swallowed like a bunch of nasty water. I'm going to take the sick condition, and now I could get a minus on certain things, or I get some certain negatives. But the thing is that every fourth game turn in the game, you take a condition, and it's a certain order. So if you're not hungry and thirsty already, you become hungry and thirsty. If you're not exhausted, you become exhausted if you're already hungry and thirsty. So these conditions stack up, and after I think the 7th or the 8th condition, the last one is dead.
Yeah.
And so you just die, you drop dead. So if you stack all of these, you have to have all these conditions to die. But it's surprisingly easy to get these conditions. So
turns out.
Yeah, the way so you're just going along, and maybe every third game turn your torch goes out or your lantern goes out, so you have to relight it. So you have to have enough fuel to keep going on adventuring, because if you go to total darkness, it's awful. It's awful. All you can do is like awful. Flee. You can't help anybody. Like you immediately take like more conditions. It's bad. So you cannot be in darkness. As you might expect, if you're in a dungeon and it's creepy and it's weird and you're down in there and you're fighting stuff, and then all of a sudden you have no light, that sucks. Like, that would be horrifying. And I think the game does, to a certain extent, really get across that concept of I cannot let this light go out. If I'm like down to one torch, I am out. Like, get me out of the dungeon.
Yeah, you can't stay around.
And hope that there's no more tests to be made.
It also wants you. Yeah, it can make you want to avoid certain things. Like, you're going by. You've maybe picked up a couple trinkets. You fought some skeletons. You're like halfway through maybe. Yeah. And then and you're like looking at your light and you're like, I've only got like one torch and a candle left. I could stick around and like search the room, but
I have
time would tick by. Yeah. I kind of just want to move on. Yeah. So but you don't want to necessarily move on and miss the your exits in that room. Yeah, the golden goose. So again, tough choices. And I think this is one of the main ways the game facilitates that is through the light mechanic, through needing to see in darkness, and also forcing you to. So say there's only a couple of you in there, 4 of you went down, or 3 of you, right? Well, somebody's got to carry the light, at least one person. If there's more of you, multiple people have to carry the light, because it's not going to travel, the whole. Yeah,
it may only get 2 people or 3 people covered. Yeah.
So and it's not like you can carry your big 2-handed axe and a torch, like.
Correct. And the last thing you want to do is throw down the torch at the end of if you enter combat. It's like, I'm gonna throw down the torch and pick up my axe.
That's just what you want. For it to go out while you're trying to swing your. No.
I don't think that's a good idea. So that's one of the main mechanics, I think, that and it's his namesake, Torchbearer, so it's worth mentioning, of course. But aside from that, the other thing that I really enjoy. You have the ticking of turns when you're adventuring, which really automatically puts pressure, light or not. Like, just the fact that you're taking a condition every 4th turn means that you have a limited amount of time in this dungeon. And it's based on rations and light, so you have to balance that. But even if none of those things existed, the fact that you have that persistent timer, like, it just gets in your head, where you're just like, I
think in a good way.
Yeah, in a very good way.
And this is yet again something that I was hesitant about when I was reading the rules. I thought, well, I don't want to be forced to like skip content or But it turns out like you want to delve into it because you only have you only got a certain amount of time. So because of that timer, because of from multiple directions in mechanics, it forces you to make the things that you do count.
They have to be important.
You can't just like hang out and like take your time searching the room. You've got to make your decisions. Every one of them needs to be meaningful, which means the game is packed full of meaningful decisions. Which, come on, isn't that what we want in a role-playing game?
I remember there was one instance where there was literally like kind of a trickling waterfall that the players could climb up and go this route. They could climb up these rocks and go through that cave, or they could go down this other pathway that was like obviously like orc and goblin infested and whatnot. But simply because they didn't want to risk the roll to climb those rocks, they chose the easy route to just go down.
The easy route of
orcs and it's like, well, I got, you understand those decisions. You have to, and heaven forbid you fail, your climbing.
Yeah.
Because, and that gets me into like, I think the last thing that I'll mention about the mechanics that I love, I'm sure you have maybe 1 or 2 more, but is the idea of compromises and not failure never meaning I just didn't do the thing.
Yeah.
And I think this is a pretty popular concept in games these days that are kind of pushing the envelope. And it's really the best, it feels like the best way to handle conflicts to me. For instance, let's say, come back to my example of climbing that rock wall. Mm-hmm. Let's say I want to climb the wall. One of my compatriots has a rope, so he's going to throw a helping dice in. I'm the strong fighter. I'm going to try to climb it up, and I'm going to hook the rope to me. I'm going to get some helping dice maybe from them pushing me up or doing some things. And so we all pitch in together. I roll the dice, and it comes up, and it's a failure. Obstacle 3 on the roll, and I get 2 successes. Bummer. So instead of, your classic kind of Dungeons & Dragons Pathfinder scenario where, oh, yeah, you didn't climb the wall. Okay, what now? You could say, hey, I want to climb this wall, and the GM might offer you a compromise, like, oh yeah, you can climb the wall if you want, but you're going to lose 2 torches in the water to succeed in this roll. And it's like, oh man, now I have to decide, do I want to get up there for 2 torches or not? Or it's like, certain GMs might be like, you successfully climbed the wall, however, you're now exhausted because it took way longer and way harder. And so now I've got a condition on me, and that's an issue. So in Torchbearer, failure isn't really failing. It's succeeding with consequences. And I really, really enjoy that concept of the game. And it's created a lot of very interesting situations for myself as a GM and for myself as a player, where it's just like, it again kind of hits you in the side of the head. It's like, man, this is real down here. This is real.
Yeah, this is one of those mechanics where I think they've done an incredible job in Torchbearer of making this a part of the game, like the way it's a part of the game. So like there are some other popular indie games, some of which I love. There's one called Apocalypse World, who now has a bunch of spin-offs, and people love this game and the rule system.
Some Apocalypse World before.
We did, and one of the things that's so great about it is that it introduced this. It didn't introduce. It has this concept of total success, success with consequences, partial success. And people were like, "Oh man, I can't. Like, why haven't we been doing this the whole time?"
Yeah.
But then Torchbearer takes it further, right? So instead of having a list of partials or like things that you can do, it's like, no, you can do anything. Like whatever's best for the story, in this particular case, is good.
But
it
comes at a price.
But it comes at a price. It does. But that's what makes it so interesting and keeps the game engaging. I think is the freedom, because this is where we talked about how it sort of focuses you, and you can only do this, and when you're making your character, and the choices are restricted, and this is one of the areas where it just opens up, and it's like we gave you those restrictions, and now that you're in there and you're playing the game, you're wide open. So it was like they just wanted to narrow you down so that you could tell a specific type of story, and then once you're in the story, they're like, tell it how you want to tell it.
And it's the same kind of mechanic whenever you're in a conflict with anything. Like, let's say I'm fighting a monster, and I choose.
Let's talk about let's talk a little bit more about the actual conflict mechanics.
Yeah, let's talk about conflict. So conflict in Torchbearer is really fascinating to me. You enter into a conflict. Let's say there's a giant spider guarding something. We enter into a conflict with this giant spider. First of all, we have to agree to initiate this conflict. It's like, there's a giant spider over there. What do you want to do? Like, so this is a conflict that we can either back away from, and maybe if the spider hasn't seen us, we can just move on and go somewhere else. But if we want to get past this, we can. The thing is, we have a lot of ways to do this.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned run, because this isn't usually an option that one considers in a role-playing game, right? You're like, monster, we fight that thing. But no, in Torchbearer, like running, it's a viable option. Like, maybe we shouldn't fight that one.
Yeah, maybe so like you might initiate, there's a bunch of different types of conflict. You have a drive-off conflict where you're just trying to get the thing to leave you alone, or just like get away from me so that I can move on. There's the kill conflict, and the interesting thing about the kill conflict is that you can't die in a conflict unless you choose to kill the other thing.
Yeah, the type of conflict you choose also informs the consequences of failure and or success, right? So if you choose run off, like we were talking about, or if you choose fight off, right? Then if you fail and the monster wins, you are fought off instead of
gotta run
instead of killed, right? Yeah, you have to run instead of. So, but if you choose killing, then you're also opening yourself up to being murdered, right?
Yeah.
So it's your choice.
It's kind of scary. And like the kill conflict, I don't know that I've ever seen it chosen, to be honest with you.
I think once.
One brave group chose. But yeah,
early on when you're fresh and you got all your bonuses.
It's one of those cool things where it's like, man, it's not worth it to try to murder this thing. I'd just rather like get it to leave me alone and go on my way so that I don't risk my own like death, which is a serious thing. So I'll just read the types of conflict. You have banish or abjure, which can be useful. Capture, so you can capture things. You can convince crowd, which is orator instead of persuader. Drive off, kill, pursue or flee, trick or riddle, and then other, of course,
trick or riddle.
Where you can create any kind of conflict. And these all come with a certain type of skill that you need, that you roll for to kind of see how you start out the conflict, and then you add it to a certain base stat to get your overall thing. And the way conflicts work is each side essentially has a pool called disposition. So I might have a disposition of 7 versus this monster's of 10. and then we attack each other to try to lower their disposition.
Sort of your hit points for the conflict.
For the entire conflict, yeah.
Conflict hit points.
Yeah, and it's nice. And so you have a conflict captain who's kind of just handling the logistics of the conflict at that time. And the thing that I like about it is that you only have 4 options, right? You have more or less attack, defend, so those are your 2, and then feint or maneuver. And those are it. Whether it's physical conflict, social conflict, any type of conflict, those are always your options. So an attack in a social conflict might be like, I'm going to make a point in an argument. An attack in a physical conflict might be, I'm going to hit this guy with my sword, right? Maneuver in an argument might be, I'm going to distract this guy by mentioning his family, and then maneuver in a fight might be that you're picking up stones and, moving around in a weird way and like trying to do things. So I like that it's so... It applies across everything. You don't have to learn all these different rules, which is something Burning Wheel did, right? You had a duel of wits separate from the attack and all that. And this is all in one, so I really like that a lot.
And let's talk a little bit about how the mechanics work. So for each of these things that you just mentioned, like whether we're fighting or we're persuading or whatever we're doing, you said there were a few different types of actions, right?
Yeah.
We can attack, we can feint, we can defend.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happening is it's sort of like a sword duel, right? Where you choose a move, you'll choose a series of moves in advance, depending on how many players there are and so on. Yeah. You're like, well, first we want to attack, then he's probably going to attack, so maybe we'll defend, and then let's maneuver so that the next thing we do will have a bonus, right? So you plan it out ahead of time, and while the players are doing this, the GM is also doing this.
Yeah.
And then you reveal what choices you have made, and depending on what you've chosen, like different things will happen. So if I'm attacking and you're defending, like we're going to be trying to do it versus face-to-face sort of roll. But if I'm attacking and you're feinting, like it changes the dynamic. So it's really sort of this guessing game is included.
It's like a game within the game, right?
And
this is actually I would say that this could be the most undesirable thing for certain types of players, right? Because
it could be.
There is in a sense where you kind of remove yourself from the game of Torchbearer, and you're playing this mini game almost against the GM.
Yeah.
So you're having to kind of guess what this person as GM outside of the game is going to choose for these types of conflicts. Now, a good GM is going to control a conflict based on the monster or whatever would do, right? So if I'm like an orc, right, I'm probably not going to be using a lot of feints, right? So if I'm a GM playing an orc, I'm going to choose like attack, attack, attack or something, like I'm going to play it as orky as I can. Now, but if a feisty GM might be like, oh, my orc's going to feint, and then you're like, well, now I took damage for no reason, that kind of thing. So
I mean, it's also one of those things where like and we'll talk about this, I think, probably in some other video, but the social contract when you play a role-playing game like this, like of course if you're the GM and they're planning out their moves, you can always be like, well, if they're going to do that, I want to win this. I can just feint here. Like clearly, like if you want to win as a GM, you can win. So trying to take the time to feel like, what would this person do in this situation, not what do I think the opponent's going to do, right? What would this monster actually do is a much more, I think, interesting way to plan out the movements, and then the players can think that way as well, like what would this do, which is what they would really be doing, right? In that situation, they'd be like, oh, well, it's a kobold that's probably just going to do this, and then it's going to run away, but if we're doing it like as the GM playing the kobold, that's a different sort of game we want to play. So I think it works. I think it works much better if with a specific spin and style.
And that is where the level of like trust, the GM has to be like, you have to have I would say like a fairly mature role playing group at that point to not try to just like game the system, because it's open there to be fairly gamed if
it can be
if the GM wants that. But if the GM wants that, why are you playing with that GM? Doesn't make any sense.
That's true.
All right.
And one other thing I want to talk about with this particular mechanic, we talked about a lot of the good points actually, how interesting and fun it can be to choose what you're doing and how that will affect the rest of the combat. One thing that I still kind of am a little weary about with this mechanic is that I think that it's possible for like an infinite loop to occur. And we've mentioned this a little bit
With the
before we
defend,
talked about
yeah.
it. So it's not likely to happen, but it can happen. And that is because you've got these two dispositions and they're warring against each other. It turns out that since they're not hit points in a real sense, they're just how much I've got left in me for this battle. You can raise them by certain actions, and you can lower them for your opponent for other actions. But if you're constantly succeeding on rolls for attacking and succeeding just as well for defense on the other side, then they can stay equal, which can mean that a fight could go on for a really long time.
A very long time.
That hasn't been my experience.
That's where the feint comes in.
Yeah, it hasn't been my experience that conflicts of any sort were overly long. But I do think the possibility for that is there. So if that starts to happen, as a GM, well, you can always make it.
There are ways to get around that.
You can always get around it.
The feint is pretty wicked. All right, so anything else mechanics-wise that comes to mind? I will say it's broken into 3 phases, right? We got the adventure phase, the camp phase, and the town phase.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really been able to dive into the town phase because we've been doing one shot after one shot after one shot.
We haven't.
But I've read tons about it, and I think it makes perfect sense the way that the whole thing works, and I can't wait to really give that a better shot. I've kind of run through it once just as an experiment, and again, you have to make all these tough choices. Like, the thing that keeps coming back to me for Torchbearer is that you never kick your feet up in the game. It's like you're in the adventure phase and it sucks. It's hard. You're trying to live. It's amazing. It's so much fun for that reason, but it's hard. And then let's say you camp out for a bit and you try to recover some stuff and that's cool. And let's hope that nobody attacks our camp. And then you go back to the adventure phase and you're exhausted and you're worn out, and then eventually you get out of the place and you go to the town. And then you roll on this random town chart, and things could be bad. The town could just be in flames, and then it's oh my gosh, we don't get to rest.
No rest.
But then let's say you get in town, and you've got all of this loot, but now you have to essentially sell it, and then try to take all of that money that you've made off the loot, and not only sleep in a nice place to recover all of your
because you got to get rid of the conditions.
You got to get rid of the conditions, but to do that, you've got to the better place you stay in that night, the easier it is to get rid of those conditions.
Yeah.
So you can stay on the street and keep all your money, but then you also keep all your conditions, which is horrible. But then you also want to go and buy a new weapon or something. But if you buy a new weapon, can you afford to stay in a nice spot? So it's just the game never stops. It keeps you constantly engaged and constantly interested, and you're always making these hard decisions. And I like it because everything that you do in town, you can do anything in town. You can stay in the nicest spot ever. But when you leave town, you make a roll. And that roll is leveraged against the amount of loot that you brought in. So let's say I've got 8 dice worth of loot, and I spent 11 obstacle, 7 worth of lodging, weapons, etc. Mm-hmm. So now these 8 dice need to come up, 8 successes or 7 successes, which is hard because a 4 through a 6 is a success. So I roll these dice, and I get 4. Well, now I'm a debtor. I'm indebted to this town, which has all sorts of consequences. Where now these debt collectors start showing up when I'm about to go into a dungeon, and they're oh no, not so fast. We're gonna beat you up and take your stuff. And it feels very cool, very fluid, and you're always playing this game. So if you actually get to level 4 or 5, as if you want to say level 4 or 5, you've done something great. You've accomplished a lot. The game is a game after all, and playing it is not the easiest thing in the world. You can be good at it or you can be bad at it, and that makes it really interesting to me. So what else do we got?
Oh, the last thing mechanic-wise I wanted to mention was we talked about one of the ways that it was different from those classic games, and that is it has mechanics for interpersonal relationships. Not just in character creation, but they impact gameplay as well. And so I wanted to mention those a little bit. So you've got I don't remember what they call this. Your type. So if I'm an elf, the more I
your nature.
Yes, my nature. Thank you.
Yeah, gotcha.
I couldn't remember the. So you've got things like that, mechanics like that, where you can use it, and it can be incredibly beneficial.
Incredibly.
But it also comes with, everything else in the game, there are consequences to the actions that you take. and you could end up, even if you haven't been dying and you're not a debtor, like you've avoided all of these these terrible things, you could just be becoming more and more elf-like or dwarf-like or and end up leaving and
it's like, well,
retiring. Like, I'm just, it's just too much for me. I realize that I really just want to be a dwarf down in the.
Or more importantly, you can go the other way, which could be even more hilarious.
Indeed.
So it's like, I'm a halfling, but I keep like killing stuff and like fighting and not sneaking around and not hiding, and it's like I'm so not a halfling that like I'm essentially a sociopath. And like nobody will be around me, like nobody wants to talk to me, and I just kind of like go crazy. So you have to balance this nature mechanic too, because it's a very powerful thing to add a lot of dice to your rolls. But the more that you do it, the more you go one way or another. And so you don't want to become too little, like too not a halfling or too much a halfling. You kind of got to stay in the middle, because an adventurer has to stay in the middle, right? Like that's kind of the price of adventuring. You can't be both a super like elf and an adventurer, because why is an elf adventuring? Elf life is great. Like you were just hanging out, sipping elf wine, and like sitting in trees. Like why would you leave that? Well, you have to be a little not elfy to go on an adventure, but you don't want to get too not elfy,
And the other thing I wanted to mention was beliefs.
Yes, of course. Beliefs, goals.
Beliefs and goals, and these are I don't know if I want to call them holdovers, but these are also in Burning Wheel. But they're the thing that can really just pull you out. So we talked about how you can in those older games like Pathfinder that you can certainly have games where there's all kinds of social conflict and interesting things happening between characters, but it's not in the rule system per se, right? You're not getting help, you're not getting rewards, you're doing it on your own. Like you have to come up with it and do it on your own. But with Torchbearer, you have to come up with these beliefs, and they are really where your character gets defined. We talked about this earlier. And they're sort of the thing that is going to give you the differences and the uniqueness that you want from your character. And sort of your drive as well, like why you're doing what you're doing, and how you're going to do what you're doing, and because of that, because it's such a small, there's only one or two of these things, right? That you're having. It means that you can really focus and delve into them. Like, what does it really mean that I believe this?
Yeah, this one belief that I have, like, what does it mean in every situation?
In every situation, like, how does it shape this decision and that decision? And and so even if you're not doing a social conflict, even if you're just dungeon delving, right, it's going to affect the decisions you make while you're delving,
while you're in the dungeon. And those are the most important decisions. You have this backdrop of like dungeon survival, but within that backdrop is like these characters developing, like, and
this is where we talked about becoming a hero or a villain. And this is the belief and the goals are really what's going to push you one way or the other, and make that story an interesting one, instead of just now I have conditions and now I'm failing, like that forces you into hard choices, but it doesn't necessarily facilitate an interesting story. And the beliefs and the goals are the thing in the system that guide you in telling just a really interesting story. And this is the thing in role-playing games where one of the things I think most role players love the most, right, is when you sit down and you're like, oh man, remember we played that one game and we did this one thing, and then the Kraken was there.
And you made this decision, and like you pulled us out of the water at the last second, and like that kind of thing.
And this is where that's going to come from in this game. It isn't going to be necessarily from like the mechanics or the fighting itself. It's going to be like why you did what you did and how you did it. And those are, isn't that incredible? Like, isn't that the kind of story you want to tell? Man, this one time, this guy made this decision about what boots to buy, and you were like, why is that a good story? Well, let me tell you. It's Torchbearer.
3 sessions. That's great. So that's pretty much the rundown. We also, I guess it's so hard, and maybe this is something to talk about as well, because every time we say like we're done with the mechanics, there's another mechanic that I want to mention.
Sure.
And really there's something to that, because this is a heavy game in that sense. Like you don't just pick up the thing and just run it and it's like, oh yeah, that was smooth and good. Like you have to really understand all of the inner working parts here, and you have to be good at it, and you have to learn it. You have to learn this system.
It's a chunky system.
It's
it takes
chunky.
time. You need to. You can't just flip through and then run.
Yes.
You need to learn what you're doing and take the time to figure out the rules. Yeah.
And it's rewarding because there's a lot of little things happening that if you don't really understand the whole thing and you don't understand the whole picture, then you kind of miss a lot of that.
Yeah.
And one of them is like ARTHA, right? So spending ARTHA, Fate, and Persona to do cooler stuff, explode D6s. This is a holdover, again, from Burning Wheel, but it's cleaned up, it's simplified, and anytime you play to your belief, usually you'll get like a point, like a fate point, but also anytime you like dramatically go against your belief, like in this grand moment of conscience, like it's like, let's say my belief is my friends are all that matters, and then I see the biggest gem that I've ever seen in my life, and I'm a dwarf adventurer, and it's like there's my friend up there and he's about to grab this gem, and I just radically changed my belief, and I'm like, my belief is, it's like you don't necessarily announce it, but more or less what goes on is the underpinnings of that is my belief changes to gems. Like all that I care about are gems. And so I like throw my friend out of the way and grab it. And that makes a really interesting situation, And tying into that is traits as well. Yes. It's kind of this idea of, because traits can be used most importantly to break a tie not in your favor. That's like the number one way to use traits, which is genius. So like if I have a trait that could be used to, let's say we have a tie in a battle or something, and I have this trait that's like Sword Master or something. Mm-hmm. So I can use that trait to win that, which is fine. Yeah, I win that conflict. That's cool. Or I can use that trait to lose that roll. And if I do that, I lose, which sucks, but I get what's called a check, and then I can use those checks to recover from conditions and do various other things. Yeah. So the system, again, rewards you for telling a great story. Because what's a good story of a hero who just always wins? That's not a good story. No. You want to have that story of, man, I was on the precipice of death, right? Like, because I could have made it work, but I chose to take a beating, more or less. And now I get to recover from that and tell that story. Uh-huh. And I think that's important. All right, so I think those are most of the mechanics that we've covered. There's weapons. There's all sorts of cool stuff in this game.
Pretty good overview.
So what's next? What's next for us? We got to ask ourselves a question. Given what we know about the game and what the mechanics do, does it accomplish its objective? I think that's important to go into.
Yeah. I think that's probably the most important thing to talk about, and I think that it absolutely does. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. So, and we've talked about a myriad of reasons why, right? Yeah. From character creation to, just the make of the book. Like everything in the game, it wants you to tell a very specific kind of story, and then guides you and rewards you for doing so, which is what I want in a role-playing game. It's not necessarily my favorite, and we've talked about this. Sure. This particular old school, story that it wants to tell. Game, isn't necessarily my favorite, but it tells the system tells that story in so well, in such a great way, that I still really enjoy the game. Even though it's not like my favorite, flavor. Sure. It's a very good example of that.
Perfect
flavor. Yeah.
That's a good summation. I think I don't really have anything to add to that. I agree that if you want to go dive down in a dungeon and play I would say a suspenseful, like almost an intense. It doesn't really, when you're playing it, it feels lighter than it actually is when you actually consider the decisions that are being made and what's going on. It's super fun. Like, I always am really having a good time when I play it. But it is, as far as role-playing games go, like, you feel consequences. Like,
well, because it's so specific, right? Because the story it's telling is so specific, and one of partial survival, right? Mm-hmm. It isn't necessarily a light and fluffy feeling you get playing the game. However, you have to go into it wanting that, right? We talked a little bit about social contracts and like what you want from the game. If you go into the game wanting that story, then it's going to be awesome, and you're going to have a fun time, even though you're maybe barely surviving or maybe not surviving. It's going to be a fun time because that's the story that you wanted to participate in. If you go into this game wanting to be, the shining knight or whatever, then you're not going to have a good time. Like, you have to go into it knowing the kind of story that it's going to tell, and wanting to tell that story. So if that's the case, I think that anyone is going to have a good time playing.
You'll be
this
happy
game.
with it. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we're going to close this up, I think, with just some general things that we, having played the game, things that we wish we would have known going into the game as a GM or as a player. So the first thing that I will say is eating rations. It was one of those things where I played a couple sessions of Torchbearer, and we were going down to the dungeon, and everyone was packing up on rations and torches. It was like, yeah, this is how Torchbearer works. Rations are important. And then that fourth game turn comes around, and everyone takes the hungry and thirsty condition. And it's like, oh, man, that's awful. And we just keep going. And then it's like, 4 more turns. Now you take the next condition. And it's like, man, this is really stacking up. 4 more turns, you take the next condition. And it's like, you took another condition from like a twist. And so now it's like, man, I got to get out of here. This is crazy.
We're halfway through.
But in reality, what you do is you just eat the rations or drink out of the wine skin or water skin or whatever. And then that relieves the hungry and thirsty condition. So that the next 4 turns, you take the hungry and thirsty condition again because you don't previously have it anymore. So I would say as a GM and as a player, number one thing, rations and using them. Very important, because otherwise those conditions just keep stacking up. I just said snack because you had Snickers.
I did. You're not yourself when you're hungry.
They keep stacking up, and then it's really short. It's a hard adventure at that point. But just, bring enough rations and eat them, and then when you run out, that's when the conditions start to stack up. So that's the way the game wants to work and should work if you're paying attention. What about you, Rick? You got anything?
Man, in that same vein, before I do a different one, also, the first time we played, we forgot about fresh.
Oh, yeah,
remember?
we did.
So our first conflict was not as easy as it should have been. I was like, why is this so hard?
Fresh and might. Might is another thing to forget. There are some creatures that are just better than others. That's the order of might, and we didn't know that. So like when you're fighting rats, you have like a greater might, so you get bonuses on your rolls.
We forgot about both of those things.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it should have been a little bit easier.
Yes, but for mine, I wish. Man, yeah. I mean, we talked about it a little bit before, but I wish I would have not prejudged anything, right?
Yeah.
Because it turns out, like, if you just let it do what it wants to do, it
works.
It works, but like, it wouldn't work like in another system, right? It's the sum of its parts that make it go to well. So if you like take each part individually, and you're thinking as a role player, like, well, I don't know how this is going to work, or this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Then it can be really hard, both as a GM and as a player as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wish I had known, and also the first game that we played, and I already mentioned this, but I want to reiterate it, that I did not realize that it was a game. You were GM the first one.
Yeah.
And I, as a player, did not realize that it was a story about survival.
Oh, nice.
Scrabble. Remember?
That's right, yeah.
And I was like
what is this
I'm
thing?
the rich son of a... Yeah. And you're like, what? No, you can't do that. And I was like, oh, all right, well, I guess I'm...
I'm the poorest.
Yeah, I'm the poorest son of a rich man. Yeah, no, it was bad news, but that was my fault. Like, yeah, you have to know the story you want to tell. Like as a group, you have to decide. This is the kind of story we want to tell, and then get into that. Yeah.
Great. Well, so number one rules that you can take home with you: eat your rations and let the game do its thing. And it takes a while. You're going to have to struggle through a few sessions of this game to really start to click it in. I think that's an honest assessment.
Struggle. I mean, it was still fun.
It's still super fun, but it's like you're going to be looking up stuff, and you're going to be let it be known that of all the things that Torchbearer is, it is not a book of like indexes, right? So you're not gonna, if you play Burning Wheel, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're not going to be like, oh yes, let's figure out the answer to this question, and then you're like, oh yes, page 32, add this dice to this thing. It's like, no, sometimes you have to work your way through a little bit of a Tor or Luke narrative to figure out what exactly is supposed to happen. But hey, at least you're reading. That's better than nothing. Last thing, final review. What about who's going to like this game, who's not going to?
Yeah. So I think
the book on this one.
I think a lot of people are going to like it. It sort of plays, and we said this at the very beginning, but it sort of plays right in that middle ground between like classic old fantasy role-playing games and flirting with, indie ideas
Definitely.
and thoughts. So like I think both sides can like it. And I think if you are a classic role player and you play Pathfinder and D&D and even Gamma World or what have you, that and you want to explore social ideas a little more. Maybe not a game all about social stuff, but you want to have goals and beliefs and like who my character is.
Yeah.
Be an important role instead of just like what my character can do. Like if you also want to think about who my character is, then Torchbearer is going to be a great fit for you. If you are more on the indie side and you sort of want to and you haven't had that feel of classic role-playing games, and they're out there. I mean, maybe not as many of these, but if you're into indie side and you like the free stuff, you're good at stunting and coming up with new ideas on the fly and character descriptions. Like you're gonna have a good time in this game once you start playing, right? So the character creation may be odd for you because you're used to having more, but once you start playing and you start getting into these compromises, it's gonna be fun for you as well. Now on the flip side, you've got the people who probably wouldn't enjoy it as much, and these are and there are, I think, those groups out there. I think people who don't want to get into those ideas, like who want to ignore. They just want to do stuff, right? They want to kill monsters. They want to tell a story, and maybe more of a more epic scale. This isn't,
this isn't really an epic scale.
It's not really an epic scale. So if that's what you're wanting, like, you don't want to use Torchbearer to try to tell that story. It's not made to tell that story, and it's not going to do it well. If you want more freedom, again, just from the other side and the indie side, and you want, you don't want to have to think about like slots and how much I can carry, and you just want to tell that story in a more free-form way with less rules. Again, you could probably find a system that's going to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that no matter who you are, I think you can definitely take a look at Torchbearer and let it do its thing. And I think you'll probably be surprised. Even if you think you won't like it,
totally.
You're probably going to have at least a handful of really interesting experiences and choices that you made in the game that are going to be worth having. Like, you're going to enjoy that you had those and you told that story that you told.
Yeah, I think that's totally accurate, and I would add that what it does really well for me is that it really makes you feel, and a real good friend of mine, Josh Taylor, we've been role-playing together forever, and we finally just kind of sat down one night and talked about what we liked in a role-playing game. And I'd never really, it never really occurred to me that this is a major thing for people, but for Josh, he said that one of the biggest things was getting together with his friends, his outside friends, his real-life friends, and going in a game together as a group and conquering obstacles together and conquering conflicts together and really having that, like, tight group dynamic where we're not, like, fighting each other and we're not, like, trying to manipulate each other.
Yeah.
We're, like, going in as a unified force, and teamwork is, like, the name of the game. And I feel like in Torchbearer, teamwork is the name of the game. If you don't have teamwork in this thing, you die. You just straight up die. And the helping dice and the way that the conflicts work and all that just really makes you feel like you're not, I'm this mega hero and this guy can't contribute as much as me and that guy can't contribute as much as me.
It's us working together.
It's always us working together, for the good of the group rather than the good of the individual, like trying to get their epic sword or advance their character faster than the others or kind of thing. So I think that if you're really into this idea of teamwork as players, I think Torchbearer is really appealing, and I echo, like, there are a lot of mechanics here. It is clunky in a sense, and so if that's not something you're interested in, whenever we interviewed Luke and Tor about it, and you'll catch that on a podcast, they said they wanted to make a system that you could really sink your teeth into, and I think they've certainly accomplished that in that I discover new things about the system every time that I run it, every time I read through the book. So it is kind of cool that you get that sense of discovery that you might get from, like, a second edition Dungeons and Dragons, where you're like, oh man, I never realized that this is how this works. So that's cool. So that's what we have for you guys. Hopefully you have enjoyed our review of Torchbearer. It's one of our favorites around the store right now, and we will be sure to have, I'm sure, more role-playing reviews for you guys in the future. because let's face it, we can't stop exploring new role-playing games. Not with Rick around, at least. If you're interested in Torchbearer, we do have that for sale on our store, so you can find that. Of course, we sell anything that we love, and we love Torchbearer, so it makes perfect sense. And also, I would say that the player decks are available as well, and these are supremely helpful. I have not yet played a game with the player's decks because they just hit the shelves, but they're super helpful for determining who's in full light and dim light, who has what weapons, what conditions everybody has. So it's a much easier way to keep track of those things. And it's kind of easy to forget what your weapons do sometimes and various things. So those are really cool, and they're pretty cheap for what you get out of it. So I'd suggest both the player's deck and the book. And pick it up if you're interested and have a good time with it. Thanks so much. Yeah. And Rick, we'll be seeing more of you very soon, I'm sure. Thanks for watching, guys, and enjoy your next game of Torchbearer. Let us know how it goes. Take care.